Out there, under a sun that bleached the earth and every soul standing on it, a young girl waited. Barefoot, dust clinging to her skin like a second, harsher flesh. Her dress, once maybe blue, now faded to a color that spoke of too many hard seasons. She stood in the middle of the town square, silent, still, with the kind of patience that isn't born. It's beaten into you. No tears, no begging. Just a silence so deep it made the roughest men look away. Behind her, leaning against a rail like it was the only thing holding her upright, was her mother. Arms crossed, mouth thin. There was no sadness there. No shame. Just weariness. The kind that hardens into cruelty. She wasn't just selling her daughter. She was letting go of a burden. Publicly. Finally. And the town? Well, the town did what towns like that do. Whispered, watched, judged. No one stepped forward. No one even flinched. They looked at the girl like she was something left out too, long in the sun, not worth saving, not worth touching. Just another broken thing. You ever wonder what it takes for a person to stand still while the world picks them apart like that? What it takes for a mother to put a child on the auction block? Or for a town to pretend it doesn't see? Maybe it's easier that way, to believe that some people are born for losing. But here's the thing most folks forget. Silence isn't surrender. Sometimes, it's survival. And in that silence, that girl wasn't just standing there. She was waiting. Waiting for something she couldn't name, maybe didn't believe in, but still waited for anyway. Because sometimes, even in a place as hard and dry as that town square, something unexpected can take root. A hand, a choice, a chance. Now you might be wondering, did anybody step up? Did anyone look past the dust and the silence and see something worth holding on to? Stick around. Because this story, like most real ones, doesn't end where you'd think. It doesn't end with pity or rescue. It starts with something much rarer. Recognition. And maybe, just maybe, the thing that saves you isn't being lifted out of the dirt. It's someone willing to sit down there with you. While the dust still hung thick in the summer air and the town square held its breath, a man stepped forward. Not young, not old, just worn in the way the land wears you down if you stay long enough. He wore a brown duster that had seen many seasons, a hat pulled low against the sun, and a silence thicker than the one the girl wrapped around herself. He didn't ask her name, didn't ask if she could sew or cook or pray. He just stood there steady, like a tree in a field no storm had ever bothered to uproot. Some folks in the crowd whispered his name, the widower from South Ridge. Said he once had cattle, a wife, maybe a family, before the years took more than they gave. Most figured he'd come to watch, but when he lifted his hand, slow and deliberate, the whispering stopped. It wasn't charity. It wasn't pity. It was something harder to explain, something closer to recognition. He handed over a few coins. Not much. Enough. And when the auctioneer nodded, the transaction ended without ceremony. No one clapped. No one cheered. The girl didn't look up. She didn't have to. She wasn't free, but she was no longer theirs to scorn. The man didn't untie her right away. He took out a knife, slow and careful, and cut the rope loose. He didn't touch her, didn't speak for a long moment. Just asked in a voice low and steady, "You hurt?" She shook her head. "You got a name?" No answer. He didn't push. "There's a wagon waiting," he said. "You can come or stay. It's your choice." Choice. It was a word she hadn't tasted in a long time. She stepped down from the crate, her legs unsteady, but she moved without help. He didn't offer an arm, didn't tell her to hurry, just walked beside her at a pace she could keep. That's the thing about real freedom. It's quiet, it doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it waits. The wagon was plain wood, the mule restless but patient. He helped her up, passed her a canteen of water, and took the reins without another word. Behind them, the town shrank into heat and dust and memory. She didn't ask where they were going. He didn't tell her. Sometimes the destination isn't A place, it's a way of being. A way of saying you're not what they did to you, and maybe that's what saved her. Not being rescued, but being given the dignity to rescue herself. Tell me, if someone handed you a way out, not a handout, not a rescue, but a real open door, would you have the courage to walk through it? She did. Even if her legs shook. Even if her heart was still too bruised to hope. Sometimes that first step is the hardest. And sometimes it's the one that changes everything. The house sat alone at the edge of a field that had long ago stopped trying to grow anything worth harvesting. The paint had peeled back, the roof sagged a little, but it stood, stubborn as the man who led her there. He didn't say much as he hitched the mule or pushed the door open with a shoulder worn from years of work. Inside, the air smelled of cedar smoke and old wood. No lace curtains, no polished silver. Just a hearth with a fire burned low. A table that had seen better days, and a silence so thick it felt almost alive. He didn't tell her where to put her things, didn't tell her what to do. Just pointed up a narrow staircase. Rooms at the top, left side, he said. And that was that. Most folks expect a new beginning to announce itself loud and bright, like a sunrise or a parade. But sometimes it arrives in the quiet, in the way nobody asks you to explain yourself. In the way a man leaves a canteen within reach but doesn't make you drink. In the way a door is left ajar, not locked behind you. They lived like that for a while. Two souls orbiting the same worn floorboards. Careful not to collide. No questions. No stories traded over supper. Just the clatter of forks against tin plates and the soft hiss of the fire settling into the stone. But you can learn a lot from silence if you know how to listen. He noticed how she flinched at the sudden slam of the wind against the shutters, how she ate quickly, eyes down, always choosing the cracked plate. He saw the way she folded the towels with military precision, corners sharp, edges aligned, a habit not born from pride, but from survival. And she, in turn, noticed him. The way he fed the mule before himself, spoke soft to the animals like they were old friends. The way he never slammed a door, never raised his voice, never asked for more than what was freely given. One evening, when the sun had already dipped below the ridge and left the sky bruised purple, she found the courage to speak. Voice low, almost lost in the crackling fire between them. Why did you choose me? He didn't look up from his mug. Didn't rush his answer. Because no one else did. That was all he said. And somehow it was enough. You ever wonder what it means to be chosen? Not because you're better, not because you're deserving, but because someone refuses to let you be forgotten? Sometimes it isn't love at first sight or some grand rescue. Sometimes it's a quiet agreement between two broken things. To simply stay. To make space for the slow, hard work of healing. They didn't have the right words yet. They barely had trust. But in that small, flickering moment, under the tired roof of a house that had seen too much sorrow, something old began to loosen its grip. And maybe, just maybe, that's how it always starts. Not with fireworks, not with grand promises, but with two people who decide not to leave. Trust doesn't come fast out here, not in a land where even the rain seems to forget your name. It doesn't arrive with grand speeches or open arms. It slips in quiet, through a door left ajar, through a cup of coffee passed without a word. Days turned to weeks, and they lived alongside each other, not as saviors, not as strangers, but something in between. They spoke little, but sometimes silence says more than words ever could. She started noticing things, how he always fixed what was broken, not just the fences or the barn roof, but the small things too. A cracked mug glued back together, a worn blanket stitched. At the seams, no fanfare, no expectation. Just a quiet offering. Things can be mended, and he noticed her. The way she stood outside long after the sun dipped behind the hills, staring at the horizon like it owed her something. The way she flinched at thunder but stayed rooted to the spot, as if daring the world to strike again. One evening, when the wind rattled the windows and the fire fought to stay lit. She spoke. Not loud, not easy. The kind of speaking that feels more like peeling old skin. I was 15, she said, voice flat. First time my mother sold me to a man. Said I was old enough. Said the world don't do favors for girls who stay soft. She didn't look at him. Didn't wait for pity. I tried to run once. They caught me. Locked me up. No food. No water. 3 days. The fire cracked, sending sparks up the chimney. He didn't move. Didn't offer apologies or outrage. Just listened. Steady. Unmoving. Like the earth itself. I stopped counting the men after the 6th. She whispered. Silence. Heavy, but not empty. Then he spoke, low and even. I didn't buy you, he said. I paid to end something, that's all. She turned then, met his eyes for the first time in what felt like forever, looking for the lie, the judgment. Found neither. You ever wonder what it means to be seen, truly, seen, and not flinched from? To have someone hear your worst and not look away? It's a rare kind of grace. Out here, people break easy, like glass left too long in the cold. But sometimes, if you're lucky, if you're stubborn, you find someone who's willing to sit with the broken pieces, not to fix you, not to save you, just to stay. She didn't thank him. He didn't expect it. But that night, for the first time, she left the door between their rooms cracked open. Not an invitation, just a sign. A small, trembling sign that maybe, just maybe, the past didn't have the final word. Maybe healing doesn't roar. Maybe it barely whispers. But if you listen close, it's there, in the creak of the floorboards, in the hiss of the fire, in the shared, silent knowing. We survived. They say time softens memories. That old wounds close if you just leave them alone long enough. But out here, scars don't fade. They just learn to live under the skin. It was a late afternoon when they hitched the mule and rode into town, the same town where she had once stood, barefoot and nameless. The same town where folks had measured her with their eyes and found her lacking. The wagon creaked under their weight, wheels kicking up dust like old ghosts stirring. People noticed them right away, not just sideways glances, full stares, the kind that stick to your back and make your spine itch. Whispers followed them, curling through the air like smoke. That's her, the auction girl. Funny thing about small towns. They never forget the stories they've told about you, even if they were the ones who wrote them wrong in the first place. Inside the general store, the bell above the door gave a tired jangle. She moved carefully, gathering what they needed. Flour, salt, a coil of sewing thread. She kept her head down, fingers light on the sacks and barrels, like she could disappear if she just stayed quiet enough. But it wasn't enough. At the counter, a woman, younger than her mother had been, but with the same hard set to her mouth, reached out and slapped the spool of thread from the girl's hand. You don't touch nothing delicate, she sneered. This ain't no brothel pantry. The words hit harder than the slap, louder, sharper, meant to shame. The girl froze. Not from fear, not this time, but from the deep, bone-weary ache of being reminded who they thought she was. The man stepped forward then, slow, steady, like a storm rolling over dry land. He didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten. He just looked at the woman, then down at the girl's hand, red blooming across her knuckles, and said, quiet and certain, "That's enough." The woman snorted. "You bought her. What's it matter what she touches?" The man didn't blink, didn't flinch. "You speak to her like that again," he said, "and you'll wish I raised my voice." No shouting, no fist thrown, just a line drawn, deep in the dirt. They left the store without looking back. No thread, no apology, just silence, thick as the summer heat. On the ride home, she kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, jaw tight. Finally, she said, voice low, "I'm tired of being looked at like I'm something to scrub off a boot." "You ain't," he said. She turned to him, searching his face. "Then what am I?" He didn't rush the answer. didn't toss her some hollow kindness. You're what they're afraid to admit they threw away. Silence settled between them again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was something else, something closer to truth. Later that night, as the fire crackled and the wind rattled the eaves, she whispered, "I'm not broken." And without missing a beat, he answered, "I know. You see, some wounds don't want fixing. Some stories don't need rewriting. They just need someone brave enough to stand beside them and say, 'I see you. I believe you. And you're still whole.'" Freedom is a heavy thing. Folks talk about it like it's air, light, effortless. But truth is, freedom weighs more than most are ready to carry, especially when you've spent your whole life being told you don't get to choose. One morning, under a sky the color of old bones, she packed what little she had: a worn satchel, a few threadbare clothes, a folded piece of paper she kept hidden like a secret. No big goodbyes, no angry words, just a quiet decision. He watched from the porch, reins in one hand, mule already hitched to the wagon. He didn't ask where she was headed, didn't offer advice or protest. He just stood there waiting, not as a gatekeeper but as a witness. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded, even though she wasn't. But sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away, even if your legs don't feel steady. He helped her onto the wagon like he always did, no different than any other day. And when she looked back at the house, it didn't seem as small or broken as it once had. It looked patient, like it wasn't asking her to stay, just willing to let her go. They didn't talk much on the road. The town sat a few hours west, over hills worn low by the wind. As they rode, she stared at the horizon, trying to find freedom in it, in the open, endless blue. But the further they went, the tighter her chest felt. Not fear exactly, something more tangled. Like she was leaving something she hadn't even realized she wanted to hold on to. When they reached the bend in the road where the town first came into view, he pulled the mule to a stop. Dust swirled up around them, catching the late morning. "Son, you can ride the rest of the way," he said, "or walk if you need to." She didn't move, just sat there, hands gripping the sides of the wagon, heart louder than the wind. "You're free to go," he added. No anger, no sadness, just fact. And that's when it hit her, the thing no one tells you. Freedom isn't about running. It isn't about getting away. It's about choosing, about knowing you could leave but deciding to stay. She climbed down from the wagon, boots sinking into the dry dirt, took a few steps toward town, stopped. You ever feel that pull? That quiet voice in your chest asking if maybe, just maybe, you've already found what you were looking for? She turned around, walked back to him, stood there, the space between them thick with the kind of truth you can't speak. He didn't reach for her, didn't coax or plead. He just stood there as steady as he'd been the day he cut the rope from her wrists. Slowly, she lifted her hand and placed it in his. Not a handshake, not a deal, just a decision. And that was it. No grand speeches, no promises carved in stone. Just two people, battered by life, bruised by the past, choosing each other in the middle of a dusty road. Turns out, freedom isn't always about leaving. Sometimes it's about finding something worth staying for. They didn't have a preacher. No rings, no witnesses. Just two people standing by the slow bend of a creek where the water moved lazy and gold in the late afternoon light. No vows were spoken, no promises stitched into fancy words. He asked, "You sure?" And she nodded. Once, steady. That was enough. Marriage out here wasn't a ceremony. It wasn't lace and speeches and grand declarations. It was two hands finding each other after too many years spent reaching for nothing. It was standing still when every part of you wanted to run. Later, back at the house, she pulled an old scarf from her satchel, threadbare, stained, smelling faintly of the life she'd come from. It was the last thing she had of her mother, the last thread tying her to a past that had never been hers by choice. Without ceremony, without tears, she threw it into the fire. watched it catch, curl, turn to ash. He didn't ask what it meant. He just stood beside her watching quiet. Some things you have to burn to be free of. Some ghosts only leave when you stop making a place for them. The days that followed weren't marked by big changes. No grand transformations. Just the slow, steady hum of a life being built. She polished the table until it gleamed. Stitched curtains from old muslin, let the wind lift them like small flags of surrender. He repaired the porch rail, hammered loose shingles back into place. Small things, simple things, but you'd be surprised how far simple can carry you. They shared the work. She milked the goats in the morning. He chopped wood in the evening. Meals were eaten in comfortable silence. No need for filling the space with words that meant less than the quiet between them. Funny thing is, when you stop waiting for life to be extraordinary, you start noticing how extraordinary the ordinary can be. You ever think about that? How sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't chasing some grand idea of happiness, but choosing to make something steady, something honest, right where you are. She didn't become someone new. She became more herself, a self she hadn't known she was allowed to be. And the house, well, it changed too. It breathed different, no longer a shelter for sorrow, but a place for living. The kind of place where mornings smelled like coffee and wood smoke, where the floorboards creaked under new memories being made. They didn't speak much of love. They didn't have to, because sometimes love isn't something you say. It's something you build, brick by quiet brick in the soft spaces where the world has stopped looking, and that's where real life begins. It didn't happen overnight. Real change never does. Out here, where the fields stretch farther than memory and the wind carries more secrets than words, acceptance moves slow, like the seasons, like healing. One morning, while the coffee still sat steaming on the kitchen table, a knock came at the door. Not loud, not urgent. Just a quiet thud, like someone unsure whether to hope. When she opened it, there stood a neighbor woman. Not a friend, not yet. Just a face she recognized from town. The same face that had once looked right past her, eyes hard, mouth set. The woman held out a jar of preserves, plum or blackberry, she wasn't sure. And with it, a request. Simple. Awkward. "My niece," the woman said, shifting from boot to boot. "She's set to be baptized next month. Thought maybe you'd help sew her gown." Not an apology, not a grand gesture, but something better. An invitation. She didn't smile, not right away. Old wounds don't heal with one knock at the door. But she said steady, "I'd be honored." That night, as she stitched small, careful seams by lamplight, she thought about how far she'd come, not in miles, but in meaning. She didn't have to lower her eyes anymore when she passed through town. Didn't have to shrink herself small, enough to fit into the spaces they'd once tried to trap her in. Funny thing about dignity, it doesn't get handed to you. You earn it, quietly, steadily, until one day the people who once whispered behind your back have nothing left to say. And it wasn't just the gown. It was the way folks started pausing a little longer when they saw her. The way conversations, once cut short by her presence, now stumbled into hesitant beginnings. No one came right out and said they were wrong. Out here, pride is a thicker wall than any fence. But sometimes silence means more than an apology. Sometimes silence is the space where respect finally takes root. She wasn't just living anymore. She was existing with weight, with worth, not measured by the worst things that had happened to her, but by the quiet life she was building, stitch by careful stitch. You ever wonder what it would feel like to stop surviving and start belonging? She did. Every morning now, with the sun pouring through clean curtains and the air heavy with the smell of bread rising, she lived that feeling. Not loud, not showy, just steady. And the ones who once called her nothing? They didn't speak much at all these days. Maybe because they saw it too. The kind of strength that doesn't shout. The kind that just is. Some things, once broken, never go back to how they were, and maybe that's the point. She knew it now, standing barefoot on the worn boards of the porch, feeling the way the evening light settled soft across the fields. She wasn't the girl who'd stood in the dust of that town square, silent and waiting. She wasn't the girl who'd counted the steps between herself and the door, wondering if she was allowed to leave. And she wasn't trying to be. Out here, under a sky bruised purple with dusk, she realized, there's no going back. Not to the pain, not to the hollow places, not even to the old dreams. What she and the man in the worn duster had built wasn't about saving each other. It wasn't about fixing the past. It was about starting anyway. The house wasn't quiet anymore. Not the dead kind of quiet that settles in abandoned places, heavy with ghosts. This was a living quiet, full of the creak of floorboards, the crackle of fire, the low hum of conversation that didn't need to be hurried or forced. He still limped when he crossed the yard. She still flinched when thunder rolled too close. But they were building something, not perfect, not polished, something real. The walls bore the soft marks of their new life, a quilt she'd pieced together draped over the worn armchair, a shelf he'd carved by hand, uneven but sturdy. Every crack in the wood, every nick in the floor, it all spoke of use, of life, of belonging. Funny, isn't it? How the world teaches us to believe that broken things need fixing. But maybe some things aren't meant to be mended. Maybe they're meant to be named, owned, carried. She wasn't clean or new or untouched by the world's cruelty. Neither was he. And that was the miracle. Not that they found each other, but that they stayed. Some nights they sat on the porch without speaking, watching the stars peel open across the sky, slow and deliberate. 2 chairs, always filled. A light in the window that burned soft and steady, even against the darkest wind. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one who believed she was something to be discarded, traded, forgotten. And she knew now. That girl didn't survive to be pitied. She survived to be claimed, by herself. You ever think about that? How survival isn't about getting back what you lost. It's about becoming something the world can't take away again. Inside the house, the floorboards didn't groan under the weight of sorrow anymore. They sighed like old bones settling into something warm, something earned. And if you happened to pass by just beyond the bend where the cottonwoods lean, you'd see it. A porch light glowing. 2 chairs filled. Laughter, soft and unforced. Carried by the wind, you might even feel it. That quiet, stubborn truth. Some things aren't broken. They're just waiting to be called by the right name. If you drive down past the cottonwoods just as the sky bruises into evening, you'll see it. A porch light warm and steady against the gathering dark. 2 chairs, always filled. And if you listen close, you might catch the low hum of laughter, easy and unforced, slipping through the cracks of the old wood. That house, it doesn't wear its history on its sleeve. It doesn't shout its survival. It just stands, weathered but strong, breathing steady. It's not perfect, not polished, but it's alive, and that's what matters. Because here's the truth, the past doesn't get to name you. Not the pain, not the losses, not the hands that tried to shape you into something small and breakable. You get to name yourself, and freedom, real freedom, isn't about escaping. It's about choosing to stay, to trust, to build. Again, not because you're unbroken, but because you're willing. The girl who once stood barefoot in the dust? She's not gone. She's not forgotten. She's standing right there on that porch, one hand resting on the man's, the other clutching the life she built with bare, stubborn hands. They didn't save each other. That's not what this was. No one swooped in. No one carried the other. Out of the fire, they simply stood back up and side by side and decided to live. You ever wonder what kind of courage that takes? To build a life not in spite of the past, but with it, woven into every floorboard, stitched into every curtain, rising with the smoke from the chimney. Out here, in a place where even the wind has learned not to speak unless it means it. That kind of courage doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be real. So if you ever feel small, forgotten, named by things that were never yours to carry, Remember this. You're not what happened to you. You are what you choose next. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stay, and maybe you've been carrying things too heavy to name. Wounds that never asked for healing. Stories you thought no one would listen to. But if this story reached you, if it sat beside you, quiet and steady, maybe it's because part of you is ready to stand, to stay, to choose. So if you're willing, drop a word below, a name, a memory, a promise. Not because you need saving, but because sometimes the bravest thing we can do is say, I'm still here, and that's enough.